Welcome to Hustle and Flow with Heather Hubbard, episode number 84. Hi, I'm Heather Hubbard, and I was a litigator, partner, and practice group leader at an Am Law 200 firm. I know what it takes to rise to the top. I also know all too well the toll it can take on your personal life. So how do you shine bright without burning out? How do you embrace your ambition without selling your soul? You're listening to the Hustle and Flow podcast. Welcome back. I am your host, Heather Hubbard, and thank you so much for joining me today. I cannot wait to introduce you to my special guest, Jason DeJonker. But before we do that, I wanted to remind you that you have just a little more than 1 week to sign up for Life and Law Live. This is our 2-day workshop in Phoenix, Arizona. It's in November, and it is dedicated to helping you plan for 2019. So instead of doing your business plan for work, assuming you even do that, and coming up with all of your personal resolutions in January, and then finding yourself in September saying, I didn't have time to focus on any of that. I never even really had a great plan to truly execute. We want to change that. And we're going to do that November 8th and 9th in Phoenix, where 50 people are in a room together and we are really knocking out your plans. I have a wonderful framework that I have used myself. I've been using with other attorneys for years. Last year we did this online, so you may have actually taken that, but we've really refined it. And this one is, again, it's going to be live in person, super interactive. There's going to be live coaching. You're going to get feedback, and we're going to have a ton of fun. Not to mention, it allows you to get away and really focus on this. So it is really important to give yourself that time and space to be intentional about making sure that you are really designing and living into the life and legal career that you want. So if you are interested in joining us, you've got to sign up by September 27th. So it's either until it sells out or September 27th so that we can go ahead and really start prepping for the group that is coming. I hope you will consider it. It is lifeandlawlive.com. We'll also put that in the show notes. And as a reminder, the way you get to the show notes is simply to go to the podcast page, hustleandflowpodcast.com/the episode number. And this time it's 84. So hustleandflowpodcast.com/84. And that will get you all of the links that we mention in this podcast. Okay, so let me introduce you to today's guest. Jason DeJonker is a partner in Bryan Cave's Bankruptcy and Restructuring group. He is an experienced deal maker and litigator, and he has been recognized by super lawyers and best lawyers in America. And he's really involved and gives back. That's how I met him. We were both fellows in the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity, where he ended up being the chair for the executive council for the Alumni Association. He has also been involved with the Chicago Committee on Minorities in Large Law Firms and NAPABA, which is the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association. He is what I call a super connector, and I asked him to be on the show to share all of his secrets with you. He is really amazing, and I am honored to know him and can't wait for you to learn more from him. So let's go straight to the interview. Jason, welcome to Hustle and Flow.
Well, thank you for having me.
So I have to tell you, I don't think you know this. You are the first guest that has ever been interviewed that is a man.
Wow. Yeah. I feel honored. And there's now a part of me that's questioning why you would want me to be the first man to appear on your podcast. But
well, and we've been trying to get you on for a while, but you certainly are not going to be the last. In fact, the entire fall, we have a lot of men lined up, including some that you know. Joe Drayton is going to be on. Pankit Doshi is going to be on. So you are just kicking off a long line of wonderful guests. So thanks for being the first guy to be brave enough to join us for Hustle and Flow.
Well, I appreciate that, although I'm a little scared now because the gentlemen that you have coming up next are much more decorated than I am. but appreciate it nonetheless.
Well, so let's share with the listeners. I mean, I first met you because we were 2013 fellows of the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity. And I kind of knew that you were a connector when I first met you, but it really wasn't until after I'll put graduated in quotation marks. It was really when we became, we were involved in the alumni organization that I really recognized you as a super connector. And so that's what we're talking about today. But before we get into that, I want to take a step back and ask some questions. I have no idea what the answers are. How did you go into law? Where did this come from? How did you decide you wanted to be a lawyer and get to where you are today?
Well, I had a mother who told me that I had to be a doctor or a lawyer. So that was a part of it. When I went to law school, I was actually working at a commercial bank. And when I went to college, I sort of planned on being a banker, probably an investment banker ultimately, or maybe in private equity or something along those lines. I had talked about going to law school, but it wasn't the number one priority. Maybe my junior year, I guarantee I sat in my junior year for the LSAT. I literally applied to only one law school. I applied to the University of Illinois because it was top 20 at that point and it was cheap. And then I figured if I got in, I'd go, or at least I'd think about going. And if I didn't, I'd go work. And I actually strongly contemplated taking a year off, got talked out of that again by my mom, who strongly suggested that if I started making money, I wasn't ever going to go to law school, which probably wasn't wrong. And then eventually went to law school, thought I was only going to be a transactional lawyer. So didn't really anticipate ever going to court. Now I go to court a lot. So I guess a lot of things changed over the course of the process, but eventually I ended up where I ended up.
Now, remind me, I know you were at Safe Arth before you moved over to Bryan Cave. Were you at any firms before that, or has that really been your career?
No, I've been in a few. So I originally summered in Minneapolis. My father's from the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And so I was anticipating moving up there when I graduated from law school because I wanted to do something different. And I felt like, well, I'd have a safety net. I have a lot of family up there, et cetera, et cetera. What I came to realize is Minneapolis is a great town, but at least at that point, everybody I knew there was very settled. So my summer associate class, basically everybody was married. I think there were literally 3 people at the firm at that point that were lawyers that weren't married. As you probably guess, I was not married at that point. May have had a girlfriend. I don't even remember if I really had a girlfriend at that point. And so I looked around and I'm like, man, and then my family wouldn't come to Minneapolis. They were from the St. Paul side of the city, and they basically refused to come see me the entire summer in Minneapolis. So I decided I really wasn't going to have much of a quote unquote support system. And I wasn't entirely sure how my social life would be up there. And although I enjoyed the work and working for that firm, I decided to come back to Chicago. So I came back to Chicago. I started my career at a boutique doing M&A and finance. Didn't really love the gentleman that I was working with, particularly on the M&A side. Good guys, but I didn't visualize working with them for the rest of my career. Ended up transitioning within that small firm, doing some workout and bankruptcy work. Eventually decided that I liked that because it mixed the transactional and litigation. Ended up moving to a small firm. And then in 2003, I went over to McDermott, Will & Emery. I was at McDermott Will for 5 years, Seyfarth Shaw for 8 years, and now I've been at Bryan Cave for a little over 2.5 years.
All right. So this is going to segue nicely. Have you always been an extrovert? Well, let me ask this. Do you identify yourself as an extrovert?
Oh, absolutely. I'm very lucky in our profession to be an extrovert in certain ways. I will say LCLD was one of those things that probably helped me think a lot about sort of myself and how I interacted with people, and helped me to sort of maybe refocus how I was looking at things like marketing, but also refocus how I was looking at how I interacted with associates and other attorneys, and where my expectations were for them, and how I was doing them in certain ways a disservice by expecting people to sort of behave in the way that I behaved, which I soon learned and figured out was incredibly irrational. So I thank LCLD a lot for sort of helping me realize just how different everybody was and how different people were, and really helping me to focus my career in certain ways.
And so when you say expecting people to be like you, I mean, are you referring to kind of like being the extrovert, being the connector that you are?
All right, I'll give you an example. I generally invite, if I'm going to do something that involves marketing or business development, I typically invite people. Whether it's I'm inviting someone else I know that I think might be, I'm trying to explain something that's probably easier to just use examples. So let's say I'm going to go meet with a client or a potential client.
Yep.
Generally speaking, if I have a decent enough relationship with them and if we are going to a social setting, like if we're going to go have a drink, an adult beverage, I will generally invite an associate here, or I will invite someone I know in the market that I think might interact well with that person, because that's just my tendency. Mm-hmm. Because I think I have a good group of people that I'm connected with, and I always think there are opportunities for people to do work or to do business together. What I never realized, and what used to bother me, was when I would invite associates to come with me to events, whether it was a smaller sort of crowd, a smaller event, or a smaller get together with a couple of people, or it was a larger event. Some of them would embrace that, and some of them would be like, I don't really want to, or I got to do this, or I got to do that. Or there were definitely groups that came up with sort of what I would have considered in the past to be excuses. And then there were groups that might have embraced the opportunity, but only on very certain or specific occasions. Mm-hmm. And what I guess I didn't realize, 7 years ago, was that there are obviously members and people that look at those opportunities and go, oh, that's great. And there are other people who go, man, I really don't want to do that. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's not what I'm good at. It's not, I don't do well with crowds, or I don't do well with people I don't know, or whatever else. And that's not a fault or a weakness. It's just how people are. And I guess I hadn't really thought about those things. Maybe I had subconsciously realized them in certain ways, but I hadn't really thought about them until we went through some of the exercises we did as part of the LCLD program.
So, yeah. Okay, perfect. Because it sounds like what you're saying is this was going to be a question I was going to ask. It's always come natural to you. Like, you are just a born networker. You're a born connector. And I just did a podcast episode on networking nonsense. And I said at the very beginning, if you're really good at this, don't listen. But then I also said, if you're going to do it, make sure that you don't just walk into that room and be awkward, but have a plan. And so even though this comes natural to you, I have seen you in action. You don't just walk into the room. There's far more to it than that. So my question is, all of your follow-up, right? And all of the true introductions and connections that you make, is that really just natural, or do you think through that?
Well, it depends, because you're asking me this question at sort of an interesting point in my progression and my growth as someone who's trying to generate business and trying to move from sort of X amount of business to Y amount of business. Mm-hmm. I am trying to be a bit more focused in my approach. Historically, it has been sort of haphazard, to be blunt. There have been periods of time where, as things came to me or as opportunities came, that was pretty much my thought process. I'd spent a lot of time billing and working. And then, I've always, I think, been good at identifying those opportunities where I can sort of match up people or where I can be a connector. I think now I'm trying to be a bit more deliberate about it. And I also think I'm trying to focus a bit more on where the best opportunities are versus trying to meet or match every opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes I do have to stop myself from trying to run down sort of every potential networking or connecting opportunity and really sort of be more focused. Like, I could spend an hour a day with emails from my partners on, hey, does somebody know someone who does this or that? Or can connect me with this person or that person or this organization or that organization. And I enjoy making those connections. And I'm not suggesting by saying that I'm trying to be more focused that I think less of the people where I might have opportunities to connect. But at some point, you got to stop responding to everybody's emails that ask if they know a good divorce lawyer in Chicago.
Right.
Even though I appreciate introducing people that I know are good at being divorce lawyers, I don't necessarily have time all the time to do that. I've got to stop having that sort of break into my daily sort of routine in certain circumstances.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't see how you would be able to do it all. And I mean, I guess it's probably worth defining what a connector means and, and why I call you a super connector. At least in my mind, a connector is simply someone who loves to introduce others so that people are getting benefit and value. And, I know of many great connectors, but you are probably, and I'm not just trying to kiss your butt here, but you're probably one of the best connectors I have ever met, which is why I consider you a super connector. Because there is, I have never been on the phone with you or email with you or in person with you when you're not asking me about what's going on, whether it was when I was in the law firm or now with my own business. And right then and there, you are thinking about who you can introduce me to where there's a mutual benefit. And you make the introduction right then and there. There are so many people who say they're going to do something and don't, but I don't even have to ask for your help. You just do it. And so for those that are extroverts out there, but haven't really figured out how to leverage that, I would love it if you would just provide a few examples of kind of what you do when you are making those connections. And it may just be secondhand to you, and you might struggle finding some examples, but I know there are especially young attorneys out there who know they have this extroverted networking gift, but don't know how to truly leverage it and connect the dots.
Sure. I guess let me start with separating things into two categories where I think I do the most connecting. And I appreciate all those very, very kind words, because I guess part of why I do this connecting, Heather, in many ways does have to do again with sort of recognizing that if it's something you naturally do anyways, and you sort of enjoy doing it, and it doesn't do anything, it doesn't cause you any strife or real additional work other than maybe sending 2 emails, why wouldn't you do it? Particularly if you actually like the people that you're connecting. So I guess the starting point is being lucky and feeling blessed that as part of your professional life, you're able to meet and encounter and connect with a lot of really great people. And so I start from that point. I've been incredibly lucky, whether it's through diversity things like LCLD or NAPABA or HNBA or NBA or any of the other organizations that I've had the luck of being involved with, or it's through professional organizations or industry organizations on the real estate or finance or M&A side where I spend my actual work time. I really have a lot of great people that I've met and have been lucky enough to meet, through the people that I've met, meet other people that have been just as great. So the one thing that I do, I think, well, is even though I'm sort of hyper and at times have fairly significant attention deficit disorder, it's counterbalanced by the fact that I already know all my own stories and already know the stuff that's going to come out of my own mouth. So I'm very rarely interested in hearing myself talk. So I actually really try to listen to what other people are doing. And I find that most people, whether it's on the business side or the law side, are doing things that I find interesting. And so I want to hear more about them and utilizing those law school skills of issue spotting. A lot of times in sort of listening to things, I pick up on opportunities where I may know someone that does something that someone is looking for. And that sort of is the starting point. It's a little bit different than sort of issue spotting for legal issues, but it's not completely different. So, for example, last week, I was on the phone with someone that is on the other side of a deal from one of my clients. They were looking for financing of a particular size on a particular time frame, and I was able to connect them with two or three people that I had worked with or knew very well on the finance side that could provide them with potentially funding or money or loans to complete a transaction. So that's a combination of sort of listening to what someone else is saying, asking questions about what they really need, and then being able to quickly think about your own sort of internal contact list or Rolodex, although I probably shouldn't use the term Rolodex because one of our associates last week literally said they'd never seen a Rolodex.
No.
But, sort of utilizing those issue spotting skills in industry knowledge to connect people is something that I enjoy and I find is rewarding from a career perspective because it gives you opportunities, particularly with people that you haven't done business, to potentially do business when you're able to connect them to other opportunities. It separates you from someone who is sort of just standing there with their hand out the entire time, which I think in times can be sort of the tendency of some lawyers. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
No, absolutely. So talking about the Rolodex, because obviously I remember a Rolodex, do you keep track? Do you use any kind of CRM, any kind of system to keep track of how you know people and what they have to offer? Or do you kind of just keep it all up there in your head?
A lot of times I keep it up there in my head. I do use a list. I have a list. We do use CRM, but I don't really use it. I probably should. And actually, that's something one of the things I'm hoping to get done in September is to actually sit with some of our marketing folks to better utilize our resources, which I think which all of us as lawyers have difficulty with. But I do keep a list. I use Microsoft Note a lot. I use that software to kind of keep track of my time, to keep a list of my open matters so that I can sort of keep track of those matters that I need to follow up on. But I do have a tab called Marketing, and it does list, here are the categories I have on this are existing client follow-ups, potential client follow-ups, ongoing, and then I have a category called Distressed Assets Workout, PK follow-ups, potential client follow-ups early, and then potential client follow-ups later. Now, I don't look at this every day. I probably look at this once a week, and I add people sort of periodically to it. But it's a good sort of source of things that I need to think about or am thinking about, and it forces me to kind of go back to it. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I do is I try to spend a portion of any commute time that I have thinking about business development and sending text messages primarily during that time frame. And then I also try to definitely listen to my other contacts. One thing that I'm lucky, one of the good things about sort of my network is that there is a lot of interconnectivity. And so I may be talking to one person that I know who has a connection with someone else I know, and I will make sure to sort of follow up if I get a bit of information about that other person from someone else. That's a really crappy way of describing it. So use an example. When I was in New York last week, I was with someone that used to work at one of my larger clients. He had mentioned to me that he had heard that the main guy at that client was going to be on a fishing trip over Labor Day weekend. So one of the things I did earlier today is I shot a text to the guy at the larger client and said, how did the fishing trip go? And he basically immediately sent me a picture of him holding a big fish. So it's an easy way to touch base with someone without being intrusive, without asking for something, but just kind of keeping a point of contact with that person because they generate matters week to week. And that's what I'm hoping for, as you could probably guess, are more matters.
Right. Absolutely. Well, something else that I think that you do well, I've seen it and I've heard others talk about it as well. You travel a lot. You are involved in certain organizations. And so anytime you are in town and you have availability or you're at a conference, you often will organize, casual get-togethers and put people together in a room. So I'm thinking that's probably an example as well for, associates that are coming up, or even if they're partners and they've got these talents, but they're not fully leveraging them. I mean, is that something that you would recommend that they be thoughtful about?
Absolutely. Although I think people have to I think you have to recognize where you're good and where you are not as good, where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, and how you are best able to utilize your strengths and weaknesses as part of your marketing strategy. So I agree, there are a lot of occasions where I go to an event and I will try to connect a bunch of people together because frankly, it makes it easier for me. And, like I said, I don't feel like I have anyone in my network that's a negative. I don't want to introduce them to someone else. Mm-hmm. I do try to organize, whether it's happy hours or whatever else, at events, dinners, things like that. The other way that I've been successful in expanding my networks are going to people that I have very good relationships with and saying, hey, who else can you introduce me to that you think would be useful given what you know about what I do for a living and where I provide you with legal services or connections or whatever else. And generally speaking, particularly on the business side, non-legal, those people are typically BD people themselves.
Yep.
So they're very talented in making other connections, and they're more than happy to connect me to people when I'm going to things. So, one thing that I've done and I recommend to folks is when I go to, particularly when I go to non-legal conferences, what I will often do is get the list of people that are attending. And if I don't know a lot of them, I'll send them to people that I know are well connected and say, hey, would you mind spending 5-10 minutes on this list and let me know if there are people here that that you would mind introducing me to that you think I could have a good business relationship with. And almost all of them will do that. The one big difference between lawyers and everybody else is they may have a busy day or they may have time crunches, but they don't bill their time. So their ability to take 10 minutes to do something that they probably might do anyways is, they're almost always willing to do it because they're BD people. Mm-hmm. Lawyers, unfortunately, we're in this industry where, we're sort of expected to be not only the business development people, but also the executors, which
right.
Really no other business expects you to do that.
Right.
We have a hard time sort of pulling the time away and taking that time and taking those steps. Normally third parties don't. So, that's one area I would suggest. I think it can be effective if you're going to a legal conference and doing that, although it can be a bit more difficult because in certain circumstances, you're basically asking your competition to sort of tell you who you should reach out to. Mm-hmm. So there are occasions where it may not work, but I will say when it comes to diversity conferences, that sort of process can be very effective because I think, at least generally speaking at diversity conferences, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I think a lot of people don't look at them as sort of creating opportunities for competition in the same way that you might at a white collar crime conference or an intellectual property conference.
Yeah.
The only other observation I'd make on this, and I know this is a long-winded answer, Heather, I apologize, but one of my really good friends in the profession, a guy that I've spent a lot of time with talking about business development and marketing and everything else, is the complete opposite of me when it comes to being an introvert versus an extrovert. I wouldn't call him a classic introvert. He has no problems talking, but he's not a person that likes crowds. He's not a person that's going to come to an event to try to meet new people. He is he's very well connected, but he's very well connected through basically getting to know people that he knows are networkers or connectors, getting them to make connections for him. And then if he goes to a conference, he's going to spend quality time with 3 or 4 people. I probably want to go to a conference and meet 10 to 20 new people. He doesn't want to meet a single new person at that conference. He looks at that conference as a way to make it easier for him to meet 5 people that he thinks are important.
Right.
And that can really be just as effective. It requires a little more legwork on the front end, perhaps, depending on how you go about your process. But you can be an introvert. You can not enjoy conferences. and you can still get a lot out of them by sort of following a different path.
I love it, mostly because you just confirmed what I told the listeners not too long ago. So I did not pay Jason to tell you guys that. All right. One quick question before we go. And this was actually the segue that I referenced, I swear, when we started. So I had a huge long tangent on that. But I'm assuming, obviously connecting others has helped you grow your book of business, but I'm guessing that it also is part of you being able to make those moves in your career to other firms. If that's the case, you can shed light. And if not, you can tell me that's just wrong.
Okay. So a couple of observations on this point. First, I think as lawyers, the hardest part is getting sort of the initial budget to be able to do what you want to do to sort of start yourself down the path of really networking and trying to expand your business. So, the one thing that I was blessed with at Seyfarth was my prior firm spent a lot on diversity. But frankly, there weren't that many people who were actually taking advantage of it. So we had opportunities to go to things like the Hispanic National Bar Association annual convention. We might have paid for a large sponsorship and maybe only half of the slots were taken. So I would look at something like that and go, all right, well, yeah, does that mean I'm going to have to work more when I come home or at weird hours during the day while I'm at that conference? Yeah. But is there an opportunity to meet new people and expand my network and potentially create more opportunities for business? Well, yeah. So I'm going to take that opportunity. But that's, I guess, sort of transitions into the second thing. So the first thing is look around within your organization for opportunities where people aren't taking advantage and try to step into those opportunities. It's not always easy. The other thing is you may need to be vocal about wanting to do things and actually spend some time putting together a plan as to why these things are important. And I think that's particularly important for diverse lawyers and LGBTQ lawyers and women lawyers, because I think oftentimes I feel like white men just sort of know to do those things, or at least they've had the example of it, or they feel more comfortable making the requests.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times diverse lawyers, female lawyers, LGBTQ lawyers don't feel as comfortable. So that was, I guess, the first thing. The second thing, and this is the most difficult thing for me, is having patience. I'm not a very patient person. And so, so the one thing I've had to, come to grips with is being patient. And the way I've come to grips with it is trying to create as many opportunities as I can so that I'm not sitting around thinking about existing opportunities that aren't coming to fruition on the timeline that I might like. Mm-hmm. So in other words, to use fishing as an analogy, right? You could have, 3 rods in the lake trying to catch fish, or you could have 20. It's going to take you a little more time to watch the 20, but you're not going to be as upset if the first 3 you're not getting a lot of fish caught with. And this is probably the worst example I could ever come up with. I got to come up with a better one next time. But the more sort of opportunities I have there and the more I can monitor them on a periodic basis, the less I'm thinking about, wow, that one hasn't come through or that one hasn't come through. Or so having as many opportunities as you can and being patient with them and really realizing that the people that you're connecting with that you might eventually want to work with probably have already hired lawyers now, have hired lawyers in the past, know a lot of lawyers, and it's going to take some time before they determine that you are valuable enough to be a part of their stable of lawyers. And you want to work with people that are intelligent, that are skilled at picking lawyers and have, demonstrated success in their careers. That's who you want to work with. And so you have to accept that, hey, it's not going to be easy and it's going to take some time to get to where you'd like to get. And so having more sort of opportunities out there, having established more relationships with people is sort of, at least from my perspective, the best way to get to the finish line.
That is awesome. We will end it on that note. Jason, thank you so much for even coming on and being willing to have this conversation because, you know, the old school way of doing this would be to only mentor the people that are directly under you and to keep, you know, everything under wraps as to what you're doing. So coming on and sharing your tips and tricks with everyone is super, super helpful. And if the audience could converse with us, I know they would say thank you. So I will do that for them. Thank you so much for being selfless and being willing to come on and share your story.
I appreciate the opportunity. As always, it's great talking with you. And I'll have to listen to Pondkit and Drayton to see if they provide better advice than I do.
Well, I have to tell you, so far, you are the best male guest I have ever had. All right. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
Okay. I hope you found that conversation helpful for those of you, you know, who are born extroverts that would really like to up your networking and connector game. I hope you got some great tips. And for those of you who are introverts, I hope that you still got a few tips that you might want to use as well when you find yourself having to network so that you can make the best of those situations. As a reminder, just a little bit more than 1 week left to sign up for Life and Law Live. Registration closes on September 27th, and I would love to meet you in person. I would love to have you in the room so that we can really knock out your plan for 2019 so that it can be your best year yet. All right, have a great week, and I'll see you next week. For show notes, downloads, and other free resources, and to keep the conversation going, head on over to hustleandflowpodcast.com. See you there.